Welcome to Living For You, the YouTube channel. I'm your favorite brother, your favorite cousin, your favorite uncle, your favorite father, your best friend's best friend. It is me, Dr. Larry Smith, and once again, welcome to the channel, my family. And I do call you family because when you come here, we come together, we congregate, we grow, we learn from each other, we get to know one another, and we expand, not just bettering ourselves, but bettering the world. For those of you who are new, I, once again, am Dr. Larry Smith. I am a certified life and spiritual coach. I wear many different hats, and if you're a continual person who comes to this channel, you will get a chance to probably see all of that and learn more about the different things that I do. But my favorite, most passionate thing to do is to help people heal. And so that's why I became a life and spiritual coach, so that I can help people deal with a trauma. If they've been affected in their lives by some trauma or infected in their lives by some trauma, my goal as a coach is to help them to accept what has happened and to be able to come into a present life and live the life that they choose to have and that they deserve to have in the future. Because we all deserve to have a good life. There's nobody on this planet who doesn't deserve to have a good life. And so as a life and spiritual coach, through tools and through resources and different things, I try to help them to navigate their way through that situation, to find their peace, find their healing, to find their present. If you want to know more about me, my bio, my background, about what I do, some of the programs that I offer, if you're interested in any of the programs, you can actually learn more about that at www.liveforyoucoaching.com. That is the business. It is Live For You Coaching. So it's www.liveforyoucoaching, and you get to know more about me, about the program, about the business, and so many other things that you might need. And there's actually free resources out there too that might be useful to you. So go out to the website and get to know more about me and more about everything, and find your present. Also, in addition, if you want to follow me, you can also follow me on social media at Dr. Larry Smith on Instagram and on Facebook, and you can also find me at Dr. Larry Smith PhD on Twitter. So Google me, find Live For You Coaching, find your healing, get to your presence, come back, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the video, share with your friends. This is your resources, so you're here to do as much, and I'm trying to provide as much content so that we all can find our present place and be in the best that we can be in the moment that we can be in. Okay, so let's get right to the nitty-gritty. Every week I've been doing, or every week or so, I've been doing videos on the season 10 of Iyanla Vanzant's Iyanla Fix My Life. And this is no different. This is just me recapturing what this week's episode was about and discussing it from a life coaching perspective. See, what makes me different than other people doing reviews is I'm actually doing this as a life coach. And so I infuse my life and spiritual coach tools and techniques and knowledge in it, along with my own personal stuff, because I have stuff that I heal and that I've healed from and that I'm on a continual journey of healing from. So I try to infuse me, as well as my profession, into it, to kind of give it another take and try to help you understand why Iyanla does what she does in some regards, because Iyanla is also a life and spiritual coach as well. She's actually one of my greatest influences for what I do, why I do what I do. So anyway, point is, so I recapture the episodes, talk about them, go over, and of course I have my notes, so if you see me looking down, don't think crazy. I might be praying, but what I'm doing is I'm relying on my notes. So anyway, so don't get dismissed by that. This particular, and I'm gonna put that down for a second because I want to talk about my take on the week's episode's name. The name of this episode was A Home Invasion, and I don't know if Iyanla or the producers or whomever put the package together for the episode with the name and what considered all of the deeper implications and meanings that this name have. So I'm going to kind of spend a minute or so on that and kind of give you my perspective. As soon as I heard the name A Home Invasion, something in my spirit just kind of was like, woo, powerful. You know what I'm saying? I felt the powerful energy of that from divine source, God. You know, it just moved me in such a spiritual and such a mental way. Because when we think of home, we think of our safety place. We think of where we go to escape from the outside world, to find our peace, to regroup, and to resettle, and to grow from to the next day, so that we can continue to go on and on and on and on. And so when there is a disruption in the home, when there is an invasion in the home, it is a violation of something against us, right? We feel that. If you've ever been robbed, if you've ever had your home burglarized, you know exactly what I'm saying. You feel that violation when somebody violates that space that you've made safe, that place that you've made comfortable for yourself, intentionally. But on a deeper, more metaphysical level, and a lot of you who know me, who know my background, know I'm also a minister, interfaith minister, so therefore there is also a more nuanced, metaphysical, and spiritual meaning behind it. When we think of home, we think of our physical body, right? You and your spirit dwelleth in this physical body as your home. Now, some people say you've chosen that home. Some people say that home was given to you. That's irrelevant. But it's still where you dwell all the time. So what happens, and I deal with this a lot of times with my clients, is when they've dealt with a trauma, say it's if it's a physical assault of some kind, they tend to feel violated. They tend to feel a certain kind of way, as though they have had something taken away from them in their bodies, their physical form, their physical home. And so that's another meaning of home, that dwelling in our bodies, our spiritual beings within our bodies that dwell, that causes us to air and to breathe air and to animate and all these things. So that's another nuance when it comes to home invasion. And then, of course, on another level, our environment, our family, our tribe, our group, our crew, the people we bring around us have come to be a form of a home for us. Our family is like a home, right? A home within a home within a home, right? That we have around us, that we feel comfortable and protected, and we can trust and we can rely on to give us the strength that we need to move forward in this thing we call daily walking. So home can even mean on our group, tribal, family, communal level. When that's invaded, that's also an issue. One of the deeper sentiments that I got from the naming of this episode, a home invasion, was that this family, we see that they actually had a home invasion of people coming into the home with guns and committing a violent act. But we also have in this family, they created a home, a communal idea, a committed ideology that they had that, let's just say, as we go on into this discussion, we will see was not actually a healthy home. It was actually a toxic home. And they had just normalized the toxicity of it, and it was passed down from generation to generation to generation. And actually, as we've been seeing with this season 10, which 10 represents the number of completion. This is why I think Iyanla is making this her final season, because she also knows numerology, and that 10 represents the number of completion. We see in this final season, we see a pattern of familiar family pathologies, of things being passed down from mother to daughter to granddaughter, or from father to son to grandson, and it's just being passed down for generations after generations after generations. Things that we've all experienced, and I'm sure throughout this season, this episode, many other episodes in this season, a lot of us are not like, I can resonate. It's been resonating with me because I come from a family of familiar pathologies that I myself had to figure them out. I myself had to dive deep and do the work and break so that I don't pass them down to my children. And my children don't pass them down to their children. And we stop. The buck stops here. The buck stops with me, right? And so we see this same story playing out on this episode with this family. And so the episode starts with the family story being told. And what the story is that this family had been involved, at least the people who were present, and some of the others who didn't survive it, were involved in a traumatic experience of a home invasion during a birthday party for one of their nieces, one of the children in the family. And you have Shantara, who is the youngest daughter. You have Anne, who is the mother, the grandmother. You have Annette, who is the oldest daughter, whose house the party was at. And you have John, who is Shantara's oldest child, who is left with a physical disability and has lost an eye because of this incident back 14 years ago. And so Iyanla asked them, really the first question any life coach asks, why are you here? What is your intention? What is the purpose of you being with me? And so Annette is really the one who wrote the letter, so she goes into more of the details. And Annette goes by Miss Ann Annette, but it's Annette. And she goes into the details, and she talks about how the family had been through a trauma, an incident back in 2006, 14 years ago. Okay, keep that in mind. 14 years ago. And they haven't even discussed something that they had gone through 14 years ago. Now, what I want you guys to also keep into your mind, I want you to keep this idea of home on the three levels we talked about. Home as in the physical place, the dwelling place, your house, your apartment. Home is in your body, and of course, home is in your community, your family that you've created of a like shared thought process, because that plays itself out. Even though it's not said directly that way, just keep that in the back of your mind. And so it was a situation in which they were having a birthday party for one of the cousin's children. It was a children's birthday party, and there were people who came in with guns, and they held them hostage, and it was a home invasion. And the cousin and her child didn't survive this situation. So there's that level of death, that trauma of death being present there. We find out that these weren't just random people who decided to just come and do a home invasion out of nowhere. They were actually looking for Annette's boyfriend, who was a drug dealer, and they were looking to rob him and kill everybody around him, right? Wipe out an entire generation of family for over drug trade. That's enough to get into something right there in itself, and I'll do videos on stuff like that later on. But the point is, they were willing to kill all these people, innocent people, not involved with any of this stuff, distant family members, over this man's involvement in drugs. And so you see this, like I said, it's 14 years later. They haven't discussed it as a family. They hadn't come together to deal with the situation and to confront the obvious toxic tumor that they were dealing with as a family. And when asked why, the answer was because it always is an argument. We don't deal with it because of how it furthers us apart, and it actually is just not easy to deal with. They just don't deal with it. And so Iyanla turns to Shantara, and she asks her perspective. And Shantara was angry. She's like, I'm angry because I don't want to deal with it. And I hadn't spoken to Annette for 5 years, even though Annette wanted to deal with it because she took responsibility for it because it was at her house. Her sister was upset and didn't want to deal with it because my kids were permanently damaged from something that happened at your house, and you should have protected them. So she didn't speak to them. And Annette's kids, we find out, weren't at the party at the time, which was actually also an interesting layer to this. Her kids, one of her kids was older, and they were on their way back, I think, from work. And another of the kids was at their father's house. And so they weren't there for that particular incident. And that looked suspicious, crazy. The optics of that is just ridiculous. And so you can imagine her not dealing with it, not talking about it. Seems as though she has moved on and just doesn't care what everybody else has been through, even though they're blaming her at her house and her man for all of this stuff. When Iyanla turns to the mother and asks, how do you deal with this? The mother deals with it the way both of her daughters deal with it. They don't talk about it, right? They don't talk about it. But Shantara says she's ready to forgive. She's ready to move on. She has a physical representation daily by having to take care of her disabled children of what this incident was to her and how it impacted her. And so she's daily, for the last 14 years, having to see this and having to make sure her child is all right, who deals with seizures, and he's lost his eye and all kinds of other things, ailments, because of the situation. So she has a physical in her face every day, and she still doesn't deal with it. Then we skip to the scene after the commercial break, and Iyanla talks to the little boy, the son, who's not really a little boy. I think he said he graduated high school, so he's actually a grown-up, but he was a young man when he dealt with this situation, like a 4-year-old, when he dealt with this situation. And he actually had done a video in which he said that this was a trauma for him and it had traumatized him, and he deals with stuff daily about this, and so he's just hoping for answers and for resolve. And Iyanla turns and asks Shantara, his mother, had you ever talked to him about the situation? Had you ever tell him what happened? And she said no. She said 14 years later, no, we just don't deal with it. And that was a very common thing, as Iyanla put out. And I see this with a lot of my clients. I did this for a while myself. I have friends who've done this, family members who've done this. Just, if you don't want to deal with the truth, people don't want to deal with the real about what something is, you just ignore it as if it doesn't exist. But what people fail to realize, and Iyanla points it out pretty clearly, is when you don't deal with something, it grows into something worse. I tend to look at trauma and issues and incidents and things like this as cancerous. And if you don't deal with cancer, no matter how much you ignore it, it just grows and manifests itself and starts to affect other things in your space. Right? Not dealing with it is not the way to be. But she commonly, as a lot of people do, I can see particularly in my community, the black community, but I know for a fact with clients and other people that happens in other communities, you just don't talk about stuff. And so Iyanla pulls out the medicine wheel, and it has different things on it, like guilt and regrets and anger and different things on it. And Iyanla tells them directly, y'all got an infection, baby. Y'all got an infection that y'all ain't even dealing with. Y'all sick. Y'all know how I put it with my clients and in my programs. I'll say, you sick, you got a sickness, and you ignoring the sickness that can kill you. You ignoring a sickness that can kill you if you do not address this. But too many people ignore it. She said, and she says, so she separates them, and she goes back to Miss Annette, and she deals with Annette directly. She said, you got to tell me woman to woman why your kids weren't there, because you know how crazy that looks. She didn't say it quite like that, but that's what she ultimately said. You know how crazy that looks. Your kids weren't there. Them kids got harmed. Some people got killed. People got shot, and your children weren't there. You got to explain that to them, and that's what she explains about where her kids were at the particular time. And she said, you not talking about this. What do you think this feels like? What do you think this looks like to other people? Do you even care what this feels like? Are you concerned? And Annette is very concerned because she like I said, she wrote in. She also takes full responsibility for what happened at her house. And she says that. She says, I take full responsibility. I take ownership of this. And Iyanla asked her a direct question. I already told you guys that I like that Iyanla is being very direct, because that's kind of my style. She says, how are you taking full responsibility when you won't even talk about it? How does that work? How do you take full responsibility when you won't even address what needs to be addressed? And she spins the wheel and she puts regret towards her. And she said, speak to me about your regrets, because that's obviously there. You're not speaking about it. You're taking responsibility, but you're not speaking about it. That's obviously a regret. And then she goes to talking about her life, and she talks about, I've lived I've lived on the wrong side of the tracks. I lived a street life. I was dating drug dealers. I was stripping. I was doing all of that. And when you start hearing about children, she said she stripped for I think 7 years, so she was a young girl stripping in the strip club. And you hear about her dating the wrong toxic guys, dealing drugs, allowing that to be her normal life. The first question, and it came to Iyanla, and of course it came to me, of course, and I'm thinking, where were your parents? How is this possible that you grew up in a good home, seemingly, at that point, seemingly, to go into the situation? And she asked a really good question for girls. Where was your father? Like, if it was a boy, she would probably ask, where was your mother? Where was the nurturing in your life? Where was your father? And Iyanla said, my father was a drug dealer. Annette says, my father was a drug dealer, and he was in jail. And it's like, ooh, what? That didn't come out. That wasn't part of the story that you grew up in a drug house. And she said, did your mom know? And she's like, yeah, she knew. She knew. And she said the guys who came actually intended on killing our entire family, or as many of us as they can. And so at the point, what wound up happening, long story short with it, is while they were being held hostage by the people who had done the home invasion, Shantara and her kids came up to the house, knocked on the door. Annette went to answer the door, and Annette said, run, we're being robbed, run. And so Shantara runs, Annette runs, the guys break out shooting and whatever, and in the house is the cousin who stayed with her child, and the people wind up killing the cousin and the child in the house as well. So it's just a crazy situation, and Annette takes responsibility for that because she she all this is happening under her house, in her space, in her place. And then she brings up the situation of one of the home invaders in court, and he recalls the last words of her cousin. And her cousin's last words, which really impacted Annette deeply, were, "I knew I shouldn't have came over here. I knew I should not have came over to this house." You know, that was her last words. And so that really, really, really impacted her. And it just was a deep traumatic situation for her. And so then Iyanla talks to the mom, Miss Ann, and she said, "Did you know your husband was a drug dealer?" And her immediate go-to is to try to justify it, really. Iyanla didn't point her on that, but she tried. She was like, "Oh yeah, he was a drug dealer, but he also was a construction worker." Kind of like, "Oh, he did bad, but he also was a good person." And Iyanla was like, "But the construction didn't get him in jail. He was a drug dealer." And then she asked her a pointed question. She said, "Well, how do you expect, how is it a shock to you, or is it a shock to you, that your daughter, Miss Annette, would end up with a drug dealer because her daddy was a drug dealer and in jail?" And so the mom goes into her story and she says, "When I met him, I didn't have anything." And this is this typical. We heard this when we were talking about Lisa Ray's father. We heard this in other episodes. You know, I didn't have the tools, and so therefore I accepted anything. I didn't have the resources, and so therefore I accepted anything. I didn't have the abilities, and so therefore I accepted anything. And I want to say, just as a side note right here, that don't think because women, and even men, whomever you with, don't think because you don't have what they have, that you have to take everything that they give. What you want is what's best and what's healthy for you and your kids. And if what they have comes with all that garbage, then you just need to go ahead and hustle it and tussle it and live the rough life until you fight to get to what you have. There's no need to stick around for dirt and for garbage just because somebody can take care of you. And that's what he did. When they were talking about it, she mentioned that she didn't really talk to her kids about her husband being a drug dealer because he did it in front of them. There was no need to state the obvious. And she said that her daughters were pretty much following their mother's path. She basically was looking for men who were just like her father. Annette was just looking for men who were just like her father. And you stayed because you were able to come from it. You became a nurse. You were able to get a job and retire, and you left him. And you feel guilty because of what you put your kids through, and because of who you lived with and how he influenced negative society. You became a correctional facility nurse as a way of giving back, which was kind of interesting. So she had guilt, she had shame, she had regret, she had a lot of the things that was on that medicine wheel that Iyanla had up on that table. Shantara came for her discussion, and of course, like I said, she lives presently all of the trauma and the drama and the garbage that had been dumped on her from her family, from her mother to her older sister. It's all and this incident having to deal with these disabled kids. And she said she gave up all her life. She prayed, and she said if God allowed her child to survive, she will always be there for him. She will do everything she needs to. But she says it from a place of obligation and guilt. Not from a place of, I want to be here for my child. It's just, I have to be here because I made a promise, and I feel bad for what my child had no choice in the matter of going through. And then we find out that when the gunman started, Shantara ran and left her 2 kids behind. That made her feel very guilty, which she couldn't rationally, the reality of it is she couldn't make a rational decision in that moment. You know, you got people shooting at you, you're just thinking about survival. And I know people want to say, well, her mother instinct should have kicked in. No, her life instincts kicked in, and she went to the basic level of survival, and she didn't, you don't think rational in those types of situations. So to expect her to be rational and do the rational thing, or to do what you think you might do, you never know what you would do in that situation. But we do know your situation would be survival, and however that means to survive, you would. And so she asked her, did she know that if her sister's boyfriend was a drug dealer? She said yes. She said she was mad at her sister. She wanted revenge. She felt like her sister should have did more for revenge. And what Iyanla turned the table to on her was bad decisions. Bad decisions put her children in jeopardy. And Iyanla really had to hone that in with her, nail that in with her, and she got it. That you knew your sister lived in a drug house. You knew your sister was living in a toxic environment that could create a potential problem, and you still brought your children there. And we also found out that her baby daddy, her son's father, was a drug dealer. So this was just, this family was just, it was just kind of, you know, a situation. But Iyanla asked her, are you ready to forgive your sister? And are you ready to forgive yourself? Because you have to find forgiveness in yourself in this situation too, because you're just as much responsible for what occurred to your kids and to you as your sister is responsible for having a relationship and inviting people into her house knowing it's a drug den, as Iyanla kind of put it. And so Iyanla brings them together, and she says they have to come here and be completely clear and be transparent and be honest. And I'm going to do a video about transparency and honesty and telling our truth, because it is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. What contributed to the breakdown of this family was trying to live that street life, being with drug dealers, selling drugs, engaging in that, normalizing all of that craziness, right? The younger sister imitated the older sister was copying the mother, and so forth. And she told Shantara, she said, the reason why you can't get over so easy is because you're still in it. You still sitting in this. And she felt as though her sister had moved on, but because she has a physical representation of the incident every day, she still feels very much present in it and feels the bearings of what that situation was. She didn't allow her sister to come in. And so, like I told you, she said, let me see if I can, so she was telling her sister how she would have acted and how she would have enacted revenge. And her sister gave a good line that kind of really muted that discussion. She said, look, we have been through hell. She said, I want to go to heaven. She said, we ain't Scarface, we don't engage in it that way. We might think drug dealers, but we ain't into that life like that. So why would you expect me to have that? And Iyanla kind of quickly puts it in place that you can't blame her for your stuff. You put your kids in that environment, knowing what that environment could potentially bring. Your bad decisions, you got to be accountable for. And so we talked to the son, Tony, that's his name. I called him John earlier. His name is actually Tony. Tony, she asked him, did he feel disabled? He said no. He said he doesn't feel disabled. He just wants answers. No one's talking about it. No one's dealing it. He wants to know what's going on. And yes, they're not telling him because they want to protect him. They're not asking the questions and having the deep discussions because they don't want to have to ask them, because asking them and having the discussion forces them to have to confront what they got to confront. And so we see Annette says she never shows her emotions. She's all in her head, not in her heart. Iyanla helps her to figure that out. And then she hits her with the truth, right? She gives her the sweet, and then she hits her with the salty. She said, you know your house was a drug spot. You know your house was a dangerous place. She said, you're not being honest. If you were being honest, you would know. You would accept the fact that you were responsible for creating that atmosphere and making it normal and toxic and inviting people over to that toxic situation drug house. So she said, tell us what your pain is. And she said, I'm in pain. And then she goes to explain that she's in pain because she feels regret for what her nephew and niece had gone through and her cousin had gone through. And she said, here's the thing. She said, Iyanla says, learning how to tell the truth and live in your truth is what you need to do to be more present. If you want to start over now, that is how you do it. She said, and Annette said something. She said, nobody wants to hear from me. Nobody wants to hear how I hurt because I take responsibility. I'm to blame from it. And she said, it looks as though you moved on. That's why people think you moved on, because you feel like you can't talk about your hurt in this incident either. You feel like you can't talk about it, but you're just as hurt. You have your hurt, you have your stuff as well. And you're not dealing with the emotional impact on you, and it makes you look cold and insensitive to those people like your sister, Shantara, who's still going through it in her own personal life. And so her fear to look at it continued to break her down and break to the family breakdown in the long run. Shantara had to come to truth, and she had to come to truth to two major things that she didn't want to. One, you put your kids in jeopardy. You brought them over to a known drug house. You brought them over to an unsafe place knowing it could be unsafe for them. You couldn't predict what happened, but you knew it was possible that it could happen because you know what that atmosphere and that street life and all that brings. That was her first truth. And then her second truth was, your mama did you wrong. She didn't. Mothers are supposed to protect and nurture. and give a safe space for kids, and your mother had you in a drug house or with a drug dealing dad, in and out of prison. So you weren't protected at all, and you learned that behavior from her and your sister. Even the cousin who said, I knew I shouldn't have came here, as her last words, knew that that environment was toxic. So in order to move on, Shantara and Annette and Ms. Ann got to take responsibility. They have to be honest with themselves. But first, the daughters had to be honest with their mom. They had to tell her. She allowed them all to tell what they were feeling. Shantara asked for forgiveness for Annette for blaming her for something she knew she shouldn't have done, bringing her kids to that drug house. And she asked for forgiveness because she took ownership of her part. You can't blame her for that. She was just at her house, but you knew what her house was. She owned it. Mom had to take ownership that she didn't protect her kids by having them being raised in a drug house with a drug dealing daddy. And she had to take accountability. And they were taking accountability, which I think was great. They were able to somehow... See, this is what happens when you do the work. When you go into the effort of trying to get the situation resolved and trying to be your best you. You have to accept truths, even if they're difficult. But when you put them on the practical and on the logical level, they're just truths, and they are what they are. So she took accountability, and Iyanla made it clear, because her actions is the trickle down effect actions of what happened in the incident with the home invasion. And Iyanla said it clear: you're not responsible for the people who shot them. They're responsible for shooting them. You're not responsible for that. So don't take accountability for that. But what you are responsible for is for normalizing the toxicity of the environment that the girls were in and that they put their kids in. They didn't see it as abnormal. They saw it as okay because you made it okay with their father. And that was the cold, hard truth. And so they eventually rounded out the episode of talking to Tony. And all of them got their chance to talk to Tony because they hadn't talked about it with him. The grandmama kind of hinted at stuff a little bit. She even took him to the house, showed him the house against the will of his mother, but they never. She would tell him an incomplete story, but she was giving him the most than anybody. Mom didn't talk about it, auntie didn't talk about it. They didn't deal with it, and so she apologized to him for not telling him the truth, even though it was to protect him. She apologized to him. His mom apologized for not listening to him and not telling him the truth, and so did his auntie for the entire situation, as well as not being honest with him. And he went on to let them know that I go through so much. I've been picked on for my eye. I feel like I have a weakness. I feel hurt. I feel traumatized. He started crying, and Iyanla gave him a good example. She said, go learn about Sammy Davis Jr. He also had a glass eye, and he went on to do phenomenal things, and as can you. That is not your limitation. Do not take this that you had no control over as your limitation. Make it your strength. And it was just a wonderful word of advice. And he prayed at the end. She allowed him to pray, which is because we find out that he was in seminary or he wanted to go to ministry school. So she allowed. So we find out that his family had been keeping secrets. His mom didn't tell him that his dad was a drug dealer and everything. And what we got from Tony, and what I very much appreciate, was his willingness not to continue the pathology. That is the key. When we see a pathology, when we find out about a family pathology that's been going on for generations after generations, it's so easy for us to just settle in it because it's who we are. Even in my family and in some of my clients' families and people I know, they say, well, it's in my blood. That's who I am. You know how mom and daddy is. You know how grandmother, grandfather, auntie, uncle is, So it's just who I am. No, it ain't who you are. It's been passed down and taught to you by people who didn't know better. And it was passed down to them from people who just didn't know better and thought it and normalized it. But toxic behavior is toxic behavior. And as soon as you realize and you get the consciousness and the elevation, the vibratory elevation of it being toxic, you have to break the cycle. That is a choice. And so that's what I liked about Tony is he said, I'm not going to do this. This is not who I am. I want a different life. I choose to. And then y'all said, but you know it's in you. And as long as you know it's in you, there's always a possibility to revert to it. But don't do it. Break the cycle and keep forward. Grow. And so the episode ended, like I said, with him praying, and we find out that the family's still working on it and bettering themselves. And I think that that's marvelous. I think that that is wonderful. That is what we want to see. We want to see receptivity of the work. We want to see receptivity of the process, and we want to see healing across the board. And this family had been through a traumatic experience, and some of you out there may have been through a similarly or another type of traumatic experience, and you can find healing. You can grow, you can be better, you can find your present and live the life that you want, the life that you deserve. You just gotta make the choice to do the work. Don't be like this family and not talk about it, not deal with it. Dive in. Dive in. As much as it hurts, those wounds, it's like lifting weights. The more and more you lift, it hurts in the meantime, but eventually you will build up the muscles that you are trying to get. And this is the same way. Confronting stuff, dealing with stuff might hurt, but it's going to get you to healing in the life that you want to live. So that's it. That's it. I went long in this video. I didn't intend to go this long, but this was so captivating to me. I thought this idea of home, this idea of our home and being invaded and needing to recapture and regroup and find another sense of home based on a healthy environment was just beautiful to me. So that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you do, we'll come back at some point this week. I'll do a video because I want to do a video on acceptance of the truth that kind of goes in line with this. And it may be something else, I don't know, but just look out for that. Remember to go out to liveforyoucoaching.com to learn more. If you want help yourself, you can go out there too as well. Follow me on social media, Dr. Larry Smith. Like, comment, subscribe. And as I always say, I love you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.